Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to the last day of the conference. Thanks everyone for joining. This session will be going for an hour and it's a panel presentation around embedding lived experience engagement and workforce development in the commissioning of primary mental health services. But before we begin, I would just like to, I've already buggered it up, sorry. But before we begin, I'd just like to, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm coming to you from Yuggera and Turrbal land here in North Brisbane. And I'd just like to introduce our fabulous panel today who are going to be providing some case studies. So I'll hand it over to Liam first and to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Liam Moriarty from the Central Queensland Wide Bay Sunshine Coast Primary Health Network, Coordinator of Mental Health and Alcohol and Other Drug Services, and I'm sitting on Cubby Cubby land. Thanks.
Next. Oh, Maddie, sorry, I've gone out of order.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maddie Blunt. I work for Brisbane North PHN. I'm the Malene Project Officer, and I'm coming to you from Quandamooka country.
Thanks, Maddie. Kerry?
Hi, everybody. I'm coming from Western Australia, Perth, Noongar Whadjuk country, and like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm from the National Mental Health Consumer and Carer Forum and will be presenting on a partnership project.
Great. Thanks, Kerry. Darren?
Morning, everyone. I am coming from Muanina country in rural Tasmania. And I work for Lived Experience Australia and do various other things.
Thanks, Darren. Rick?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rick Corney. I'm the Senior Mental Health Peer Support Worker at Ballarat Community Health. I'm sitting on Wadawurrung land, and my case study will be the Connecting to Community Mental Health program.
Thanks, Rick. And Roy? You're on mute. There we go.
Good morning, everybody. Sorry about that. I work for Linking Futures. I'm currently on Ngunjerri land and also work on Ghana here in Adelaide, South Australia. My case study will be the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peer workers. Yeah, so that's me.
Thanks, Roy. Wilhelmina?
Thanks, Paula. I'm Wilhelmina. I am the Mental Health and Joint Regional Planning Project Officer at Central and Eastern Sydney PHN, and I'm speaking to you today from Gadigal land and would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and to people with a lived and living experience of mental illness.
Thanks, Wilhelmina. And Candice?
Thanks, Paula. Good morning, everyone. My name is Candice Fuller. I'm a lived experience representative with Central and Eastern Sydney PHN, and I'm talking from the Darrell lands today in the Sutherland Shire in Sydney. Thank you.
Well, thanks, everyone. I'm just one of the luckiest people in the world to be able to work with our members of our panel, which is a mix of PHN representatives that sit on Malene, as well as some of our leaders. Today's, what we've planned to do today is just to provide some short, sharp case studies and, you know, that's happening around the place around embedding people with a lived experience in the mental health reforms and also building the lived experience workforce. Please, we want it as interactive as possible. So please do use the question and answer section. And also if you'd like to share some, some engagement activities or lived experience workforce development stuff that you've been involved in too. So at the end, we're trying to, if I shut up, we're trying to make sure we have about 15, 20 minutes at the end of the session. So I've previously presented on Malene at previous conferences, but it's important to sort of lay a little bit of the context and, you know, what's happened over the last 5 years. So for those newer to this space, in July 2016, the Federal Department of Health handed over responsibility for the commissioning or funding of mental health, suicide prevention and alcohol and other drug services. That was a big step because previously PHNs had only really been involved in the Partnership in Recovery program, which was targeted at, you know, severe and complex mental health services. But it now, from 2016, it's expanded across a whole range of the step care spectrum, from low intensity brief intervention programs, priority groups such as child and youth Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, alcohol and other drug, suicide prevention, etc. So the PHNs, it was a big move, and I guess the reason that some of the other background was that in 2017. All of the PHNs came together, and at the end of the 2 days, we're invited to identify 4 key priorities for all PHNs. 2 of those were around engaging people with a lived experience, and the second one was around lived experience or peer work development. I was able to provide a keynote address at that, and I shared a bit about what we'd been doing in Brisbane North PHN, and with so the department then actually contacted us in 2018 and then asked us to chair and project manage the mental health the National PHN Mental Health Lived Experience Engagement Network. So you'll see up on the screen our broad objectives. The main thing is that we've been seeing for years, strategies and inquiries, and even more recently some inquiries and recommendations around the mental health reforms must involve and have lived experience leading the co-design programs. We hear the C word a lot of times, and I thank Bronwyn in the previous keynote just for her definition of co-design, and we also look at co-production. Kerry will be talking a little bit about a great project that we're involved in a bit later. But so Malene has been going since mid-2018, so I think we're about 3 and a bit years into it. And I guess the main activities, and Maddie was employed as the part-time project officer to support the work of Malene. But our membership's made up of 31 PHNs around Australia. CEOs nominate a delegate or 2 to attend. We have monthly network meetings, annual stakeholder forums where we invite in lived experience expertise. We've undertake stock take report, and our role is to look at ways we can nationally improve lived experience engagement, and also training and capacity building. Maddie's been working on most recently a couple of really great projects at that stepping us into a higher level of maturity as a network. And this is around our leaders advisory group. So Maddie, would you like to just share a little bit about our lead group?
Yeah, thanks, Paula. So LEAD stands for Lived Experience Advocacy Delegates. Over 2020 to 2021, Malene undertook to develop an independent advisory group of lived experience leaders who were nominated by their PHNs because they worked with their local PHN on co-design activities. LEAD is comprised of consumers, carers and peer workers. Rick, Darren and Roy, my co-presenters today, also sit and are a part of the lead group. LEAD currently meets on a bi-monthly basis and are provided with capacity building opportunities. And the development of the terms of reference for that group was a co-design process with the LEAD members. More recently, some LEAD members were sponsored to attend the Mental Health Services Consumer and Carer Forum. Additionally, some peer workers were nominated to attend a lived experience workforce dialogue conference, which was delivered by peer-led organisation Brook Red, and that was in partnership with Malene. And in October last year, the LEAD group were approached by the Department of Health to be involved in a consultation process for the Head to Health platform. Also, some advice that has been provided by LEAD to PHNs to date includes how PHNs can improve their engagement activities by aiming for authentic co-design processes and what capacity building is needed for people with a lived experience to enable that authentic participation.
Great, thanks for that, Maddie. And the other area that we've just completed is a stock take report. So we take regular stock take reports of PHN's activities, and we've noticed, we're just about to launch the results, but noticed a positive increase since our first 2018 survey. So I'll just going to hand it over to Liam now, because it's Liam's going to explain a bit about the PHN land for and how he's been his PHN has been embedding lived experience engagement and workforce development. So over to you, Liam.
Thank you. And yes, that's what I was going to say. Ask for the next slide. Okay. So I'm Liam Moriarty. And as I said, I'm sitting on Cubby country. So PHN hold some responsibility for mental health commissioning across Australia. And with each PHN is different, with diversity in geography, community and health needs, which comes with a unique set of qualities and challenges for which consumer engagement is essential to understanding. As our community's health needs are a forever changing landscape, we're all at different stages of lived experience engagement. So it's difficult for me to tell you how or what you should do next to engage. So I'm honestly just focused on trying to create passion, drive and prioritisation for embedding lived experience engagement in our commissioning cycle of primary mental health services. Next slide, please.
Whoops, didn't work. Oh no, what's happened?
That's okay. Yeah.
There we go.
Fantastic, thank you. So this image was designed based from a co-design workshop with consumers and carers about the enablers and barriers to step care in the mental health model. And I'm sure you already know the benefits that come with engagement from people with lived experience. We've seen the recommendations from the Productivity Commission into mental health and countless health policy reforms. And we know through collaborative planning and design, we're able to develop suitable services, make systems more efficient, and importantly, increase access to those who need it and the services they need. Although I've set this in the context of commissioning, and therefore it's relevant for PHNs or any commissioning body, it's also important for people with lived experience to see where they can influence the system and service providers for how you can advocate and make change for your consumers. Next slide, please.
There we go.
Thanks. So what could it look like to embed the expertise of people with lived experience in all levels of commissioning cycle? Well, luckily for me, this idea was workshopped in the Malene Forum last year, where we mapped the stages of commissioning and opportunities for lived experience partnership and the underlying policy frameworks to provide structure to that partnership. It would take me hours to talk through what we mapped, so I'll just brush over a few key elements in the commissioning cycle that really stood out to us. Starting with a needs assessment, we know data is not always a true representation of community need. We have to test assumptions that come from these needs assessments with people with lived experience who understand the context. If we skip down to service and system development, the mental health sector is flawed. There are barriers to navigating and accessing suitable services, and these services aren't always connected. And often we hear that you need to tell your story multiple times. To overcome this, it requires a partnership with people with first-hand experience to lead and develop enablers to better these systems and services. for service delivery, this is where we identified workforce development strategies. And we've seen the recent release of the Lived Experience Workforce Development Guidelines by the National Mental Health Commission. I strongly advise you all to check that out. Some common goals of workforce development for people with lived experience are enabling integration of peer workforce across mental health settings, supporting peak bodies, enabling organizational and cultural readiness for lived experience workforce. That's just to name a few. Then when it comes to monitoring and evaluation of these services and processes, we need to measure the outcomes that matter. Surprisingly, I probably won't go to the GP and say my goal is to improve my K10 score. I'm sure I'm more likely to come with real goals like reconnecting with community, getting back to work, feeling safe, and some system outcomes like not having to repeat my story. We need to evaluate our programs around the outcomes that matter to the people we're supporting. That doesn't mean we dismiss clinical measures entirely, but they cannot be the only measure of success for a service or system. As a somewhat final statement, everyone here today holds an important space in mental health sector reform to create fundamental change of processes in policies and service delivery of the health sector. By engaging with people with lived experience in commissioning, we can create lasting change that will make a real difference to the health of our region. What drives successful reform is dependent on how the process is applied. It's not how the contents are formulated. We know the benefits of lived experience engagement. It's time we prioritise applying engagement. And the rest of the panel, like Paula said, will present on how individuals and groups are embedding lived experience engagement. So I'll pass back to you, Paula, to introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Liam. And along with our Malene's work in developing the lead advisory group, I'm incredibly excited and we're also very committed to knowing that PHNs need to develop some genuine partnerships and collaborations at that national level in lieu of the fact there's no national peak body for us to go to. So I'd love to hand it over to Kerry to talk about an exciting new partnership that we've been working on. Over to you, Kerry.
Thanks, Paula. It is an exciting partnership just because of the fact, as you're saying, that it's starting to join together what's probably a critical mass out there already of people with lived experience expertise to start informing some of these reform projects that we see starting in the mental health sector. And I think being very clear even about what we mean by reform, I think is a key step. And so we've come up with, and Paula and I had obviously been talking about this for some time, where it was, from separate spaces, we strongly felt the need for 3 key leadership projects, and you can see them there. Before we move to the next slide, I just do want to talk briefly about some of the context, I think, in the reform space that informed the way that we've set about structuring these projects, and just building on Liam's wonderful diagram there and the work that you guys are doing around the commissioning cycle. And the need, as you say, Liam, for that lived experience peer workforce development guideline to be implemented across all of those elements of the commissioning cycle. We felt that it was really important to understand what was meant at a slightly deeper level in terms of lived experience. And I think one of the challenges we have is that understandings around mental health are still limited, I think, by fairly narrow understandings of what the problem is that we're seeking to fix. And I think the lived experience workforce development guidelines really highlight that this is a shift from conceptualising the problem as sitting in a context-independent way and within someone's brain to very much a relational and political lens that explores the space between people. And therefore, where are we going to actually direct those resources? The other context that we're sitting within is we know, as Paula mentioned, that we have had a lot of inquiries and a lot of documents written that explore personal recovery and what that might mean. But we've had the Australian Recovery Framework, but we've never really implemented it as other countries have started to do with an implementation infrastructure or a translational capability, such as the UK with IMROC and the States with their regional hubs around technology transfer centres based in universities and so on. So we're coming from a change management perspective, which I think we all understand, is needed as part of this reform. We're coming from a pretty empty space in terms of implementation and translation capability. And so we thought that the projects that we came up with really needed to address these issues. And I think the other challenge that's appearing over the horizon is that there's an emerging awareness. There was a paper, for those of you who haven't seen it, I encourage you to look at it, came out through the World Psychiatry Association a week or two ago. That was an umbrella review of the efficacy of the existing first-line treatments around pharmacology and psychotherapy, which really was pretty clear that we've topped out in terms of how effective they can be, and it's at most about 50%. So they're calling for a radical re-exploration around what actually people might need. And we think that the lived experience workforce needs to be equipped to understand and to work through this really considerable change management process that I think Australia is lagging behind in. For those of you who would have seen, the work coming out of the United Nations and the World Health Organization around the need to move into community and to provide really personal, strength-based, humanistic, political support to people. Australia's been really quite absent from any of the best practices that have been highlighted so far. So we felt that we needed to do something about that to support the lived experience workforce development. The projects we came up with, if we could just go to the next slide now and have a quick look at the curated knowledge base in a little bit more detail. So we thought there were a couple of things we really needed to explore. Let's try and centralise relevant contemporary understandings around lived experience, have a look at the international and national initiatives that are underway, but also have a look at what does, as we've talked about, co-production and co-design mean. I went to the UK a few years ago, and again, for those interested in some of the barriers to implementing co-design or co-production, there's a couple of great papers put out, particularly Progress Through Partnerships, which have kind of systematically examined the attempts that the UK have made in the past, and they're quite ahead of us. It's good to learn from these kinds of things. Certainly one of the things we thought was that we needed to understand and build capacity from a change management perspective, both with the lived experience workforce, but also, of course, the existing workforces and organisations, so that this can be done effectively. What we're really trying to do here is, from a commissioning cycle, we're trying to implement reform from the problem formulation and the knowledge production right through to the systems, the policies and the services, without the traditional pipeline of university research, which has been obviously heavily skewed towards existing ways of thinking about things. So if we just move on to the next project, the second project, we're looking at developing a governance framework to support that lived experience workforce development and do some practical work involving existing organisations around the change readiness aspects that need to be done. We have been awaiting on that guidelines to see where we need to head with our work. We're not going to repeat any previous documents, and it will be a co-design process. And then finally, of course, the third project, if we are having a lived experience workforce come into this commissioning cycle, then we really, really need to understand what are the skills, the competencies to build on that guideline so that we can make sure that everybody working in these positions actually have the skills and the competencies that they need to deliver. Finally, as part of this workforce education, we've partnered with the Yale Academy for Transformational Leadership to run through 3 cohorts of people with lived experience to equip them with the skills that are going to be required through this change management process that we're about to embark upon, excitingly, in Australia. So thanks for that. That's my quick presentation. I will now hand back to Paula.
Thanks, Kerry, and we're really, really excited with this partnership. And so thanks, Kerry. And Kerry is just absolutely awesome. So I do want to just say that, Kerry, like everyone else. And speaking of awesomeness, I'd like to hand it over to Darren from Tassie.
Good morning. Yes, it's Darren from overseas on Muanina country in rural Tasmania. You might want to hit the next button. So originally I was going to speak to you all about the fantastic connection that our Primary Health Tasmania commissioned, we can see Flourish. So you can see in the top picture there, Flourish is the consumer organisation that got people together in a 2-day camp to talk about lived experience engagement. And we actually got Helen Glover down and she talked about her design thinking process. And look, this, at the time when we were first discussing this presentation, I was going to speak for 5 minutes about how important it is in rural areas, especially rural and remote areas, to have such a fantastic event, to get people from all over the state to come together. And that really helped Flourish solidify, getting people to know each other and understanding how we can use lived experience engagement. Then COVID hit, actually, and I thank the speakers Evelyn, Kimberly, and Neil yesterday for helping us think about the devastating impacts of COVID. So I don't mean to undermine the devastating effects. So Flourish in Tasmania then looked to pivot to having actually weekly coffee catch-up meetings that we started to talk about just to get members together, not to talk about COVID, not to talk about mental health issues, but just help us as an organisation in lockdown to connect with each other. And 2 years later, we are still doing those coffee catch-ups. Next slide, maybe. Thank you. So there's a lot of work to be done in, might need to hit the next buttons. Thank you. So Lived Experience Australia, who I work for, we also saw that there was, we did a national survey report on the effects of COVID and particularly in how people had transitioned really rapidly into using telehealth in psychiatry. And this report that you can find on Lived Experience Australia website, like I said, done a year ago. So, and it came out with some really fantastic insights into the, because we've all taken a very deep dive into doing this, meeting via Zoom. And so we got a lot of amazing insights from there. Some of the poor impacts for people who like having face-to-face discussions. Yet there were quite a few very interesting experiences that consumers had about how much benefit they've found from using, virtual sites like this to connect with people all over the country and internationally. And also on an individual level, how good it's been for them to connect with psychiatrists and clinicians. Maybe next slide. So just to wind things up, I think this has been an absolutely just horrific time for many, many folk across the world. But I would just like to finish that by maybe getting us all to embrace this change, that now that people in rural and remote regions of Australia can actually connect through platforms like today, and that hopefully we'll keep this connection going into the future, so that it's not just metropolitan lived experience advocates can meet, but all of us doing remarkable work around the country. Thank you, Paula.
Oh, thanks, Darren. And I know I'd just like to add there that us Metro PHNs and PEEPs have over the last few years learnt so much from our remote, rural and regional PHNs and our lived experience consultants. around using technology. So, anyway, it has been a very steep learning curve, particularly for dinosaurs like me. Alrighty, I'd just like to hand it over to Rick now. So Rick's down in Victoria.
Thank you, Paula. Yeah, just leave it on that slide. Thank you very much. Okay. I'd like to talk to you today about the Connecting to Community program, which I co-designed with my then General Manager of Social Services at Ballarat Community Health, Jane Measday, in 2018. And that came 20 years after I had a diagnosis of schizophrenia. The co-design process started when we surveyed 70 clients of the Partners in Recovery program, which was soon to be defunded, and it was around their unmet needs. And the four unmet needs was that they lacked social inclusion, they lacked meaningful daytime activity, they wanted improved mental health, and they wanted improved physical health. And I'll guarantee that if we survey people in 100 years' time, that those unmet needs will stay the same. People just need to feel connected and have a reason to want to get out of bed and do something, day to day. So that was our starting point. We then held a public event called a Speak Out, where we invited people in Ballarat to come and tell us what was going on for them with their mental health and what were some of the barriers to feeling included in their community. That really sort of got us thinking that the community is the resource. We didn't have to come up with other programs or new programs because community programs were already out there. What we really needed to do was link people to what was out there in the community and with the goals that they set out, that they prioritised. At that time, I was also part of a Department of Health and Human Services workforce development group here in Victoria, and that was about growing the lived experience workforce. So it was really a match made in heaven that we could use peer workers to deliver the Connecting to Community program. So I'll just give you a quick overview of the program. It's 6 sessions. Those sessions don't have a time limit on them. So if we need to go and meet someone at their house, walk them to the bus stop, to catch public transport, overcoming their anxiety in doing that, getting them to the program that they've identified they'd like to do, and getting them back home again, within those 6 sessions, that's what we endeavoured to do. We found that in some instances we don't need 6 sessions to get people achieving the goals that they set out. And I think the marvellous thing about the Connecting to Community program is that it's a continuous co-design process, because everyone that comes into the program has an individual goal that they wish to achieve. And so the peer workers also become resources on what's available in the community, and it's a really good fit. So just to give some examples, we've had young people who we've helped get their learners driver permits. We've helped people enrol in study. We've helped people connect to community groups that are out there, like the Men's Shed, or art groups that are running. We've helped people redo their resumes because they're looking to work. So whatever the goal is, we feel it can be achieved, or we can at least get people on the path to achieving that goal. I think one of the of a peer worker and asking me to help create this program really showed some leadership as far as growing the lived experience workforce. And there were other programs before us, we recognise that, but the fact that 3 years before the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system recognised that lived experience needed to be embedded in the mental health system, Ballarat Community Health were at the forefront. Our Health Network, who funded the Connecting to Community program, they recognised the importance of lived experience in delivering delivering services back in 2019 when they first began funding this program. So I think both services, or our service and the PHN, need recognition for their foresight. And the thing that we said to the PHN was that we'd really like the program to be given time to grow roots in the community. I've been employed in 2 organisations in 9 years, and I've been in 6 different mental health programs, because programs get funded, they come and go, and they don't get a chance to be embedded in their community. And so far, so good. The Connecting to Community program is being funded through to 2023 now, and fingers crossed, hopefully beyond that. So, big kudos to the West Vic PHN for giving the program a chance to succeed. So that's the overview of it. I'm super excited to have created something that the community is really embracing, and that we're kicking a few goals and getting people up and going and out in their community. So thank you very much, Paula.
Oh, thanks, Rick. And I remember last May, we actually had the opportunity to catch up at our annual Moline Forum, and I think we're having a coffee at the time or something, or it was after a session, and just hearing the work that Rick's done, I left there thinking the old Paul Kelly song, from little things, big things grow. Really love the, co-design it's co-designed with the individual too. So well done on your work down there. Now moving across to South Australia, Roy.
Hello everybody, thanks Paula. I'd just like to speak about our journey with Lopco's linking features with the Adelaide PHN in terms of the adoption of lived experience peer workers, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lived experience workers, sorry. So the commissioning looked at, the connectivity between Aboriginal and Torres Strait people, young people across Australia. That's only 10% at the time, so improvement was needed. So there was 2 parts to this contract, and whereas we looked at developing a cultural measuring tool and the development of the peer workers, and so my involvement through this was as a project officer for, teaching these guys, like from recruitment all the way through induction and all that kind of thing with Headspace SA. It was a very interesting time in terms of lived experience peer workers coming into a very clinical space, and trying to build resilience and navigate the world scenarios with them, like as Aboriginal people, young people coming in from the community, and not having a great understanding. I mean, they had some understandings of mental illnesses, but we worked on this and looked at ways we could adapt, and made them work, through narrative therapy, creating a safe and culturally appropriate setting through the workplace. The wonderful thing was with Adelaide Headspace was, and the PHN, was looking just to make it a fit, as in, it was more than what's the word? Sorry, the word escapes me, but it was a definite bit looking into policies and procedures and being very embracing towards Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So, we've worked with building a self-sustainable ecosystem so that when the cultural mentor, which was the contract ended, they would have their own ecosystem in terms of mentors mentoring each other, making connectivity with Aboriginal governed services throughout Adelaide, and even introducing them to the Grannies group, seeking that permission culturally to operate on Kaurna land and surrounding, to help the youth of the country that we work in. So yeah, it was an amazing journey happy, sad, there were some successes, some losses, but supporting people, young peer workers, that seemingly to be immersed in trauma is a very, one needs a lot of skills and time to do this. And although the contract would have been longer, we found in hindsight. And we did find some really positive things. All of it was positive, actually, overall, but time-wise could be more. The employment of more peer workers was needed in terms of male and female to be culturally appropriate, and also have that person to support within the office, even though Headspace had great support within their offices through workplace mentors, they were very open to contacting us, seeking advice on how they could do things better culturally, working with, the peer workers. That was, I'm just looking here. They started their courses around peer work. We used the peer work frameworks existing, the wheel we didn't reinvent the wheel. They started education in terms of peer work and power threat theory frameworks, and just minority groups within the minority groups in terms of the gender diverse community, stolen generations, so they would understand transgenerational trauma and how that is passed on to young people. Just a wide variety of things, and that's us. Thanks, Paula. Sorry. One thing. I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Perriagas, who is the Managing Director of Linking Futures, and having faith in the lived experience space, which was very interesting for a man of that calibre that has never worked with lived experience here before, and just having that. Thanks. That's it. Paula?
Thanks, Roy. And this is a big issue. This project funding and time limited. And one of the benefits of having Malene is that we capture these pockets of brilliance that is going on around Australia, and then share that with the department and other PHNs, because we actually have seen some actually roll out as a result of that. Now, last but not least, I'd like to hand it over to the fabulous Wilhelmina, who got us here in one piece, and Candace Fuller. Off you go.
Thanks, Paula, for that really kind introduction. And we're really excited to be sharing with you today the co-design process for one of Central and Eastern Sydney PHN's commissioned services, which is Head Start, a regional service navigation platform. So for some context, back in 2019, we began work developing the Central and Eastern Sydney Regional Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Plan. And this plan is a collaboration between key stakeholders in our region in order to take a kind of regional approach to improving mental health service integration. To develop our plan, we had a number of consultation sessions with consumers, carers, service providers, and community members. And one of the things that we heard repeatedly was that finding the right mental health service for yourself was really quite a challenge, and that the existing navigation platforms that just listed all the services available in a geographic region weren't working. So CESPN, the PHN I'm employed with, commissioned the Bright Agency to develop Head Start with in-kind support from our stakeholders involved in the regional plan. And what happened was a group was formed, and this working group were met over an extended period of time to co-design all of the content on the platform. Members included PHN representatives, members from local health districts, community managed organisations, as well as consumers, carers and community members. And they were responsible for how services were listed, what information on these services was available, and how you navigated to these services. It's important, I think, for me as a PHN commissioning partner to actually hand over now to Candice to share what it was like for her being part of this important working group and the lessons that we all learned along the way as we developed our platform.
Thanks, Wilhelmina. Yeah, so I'll be talking today about some of the key lessons learned from our experiences and my experience of being on the Head Start working group, including our co-design processes. Reflecting on the process today, the main lesson learned was the importance of clear communication. Initially, our working group was unclear around our roles and responsibilities, which meant that our earlier meetings were ineffective. To address this, we created a clear terms of reference in plain English and also hosted an introductory meeting with the working group and the Bright Agency, which ensured that all parties knew what their individual responsibilities were. A challenge that we encountered was ensuring that important information about the development of the Head Start tool and the required content was shared in an effective and timely manner between the developer, Central Eastern Sydney PHN as the commissioner, and with all members of the working group to ensure that everything was completely co-designed. As the project officer responsible, Wilhelmina has great strengths in her ability to put together helpful presentations for each meeting, synthesising information and highlighting decision points so that informed decisions could be made. This has been really helpful for myself and I'm sure to all of the members of our working group. Facilitation was key to each of our meetings. It was imperative to make sure everyone knew the value of their feedback and the importance of hearing of differing opinions. This ensured that all decisions made were informed by robust discussions at every stage. And no matter who was chairing any of our meetings, all group members were encouraged to provide feedback, not only during meeting times, but also outside of these through email or a phone call. Our working group continues to meet and we will continue to review the navigation functionality of the Head Start tool, continue to build the content of this site and implement the communication strategies developed. And if we could just go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So Head Start Central and Eastern Sydney launched in March 2021 with a site update pushed through in December 2021. The online platform provides access to local mental health information and services for people who are experiencing mental health concerns, as well as their friends, family and carers. Rather than providing a directory of services or listings based on geography, the user answers questions about their individual needs and is then directed to services that they may be eligible for in their specific region. We encourage you to please take some time to have a look at the platform and feel free to email us if you have any questions about the co-design process. I would like to thank Central and Eastern Sydney PHN for the opportunity to be involved. I'm so passionate about supporting and promoting positive mental health in our community. And so I really loved working with everyone in the development of this platform in the hopes that it will make it easier for people to connect with the support that they need in their region. I would also like to thank my fellow lived experience representatives who've been a big part of this group as well. That is Lynn Anderson, Joseph Savadakis and Bill Ramage. Thank you, and I'll hand back to you, Paula.
Oh, thanks, Candice. Great stuff. So I might just kick off with some questions for the panel, and I've just also got to check the discussion board, but we may as well start with you, Candice, if you don't mind. And you've shared some lessons learned and about the program. So, in your capacity as a lived experience consultant, what advice would you give to organisations looking to start their own working group?
Yeah, just make sure I'm not on mute. I mean, there's a lot that I could say there. I guess, firstly, I would encourage organisations to seek consultation from all stakeholders, including those with a lived experience. I guess in identifying and clarifying what the main purpose and objectives are of the working group that you're wanting to establish. It's important that a range of perspectives and voices are included throughout the entire process, so from planning, implementation and evaluation. So once that's clear, it's important that organisations promote and advertise the working group widely through multiple networks to ensure that you gain suitable expressions of interest. Once members are recruited, I found it's really been really important that there's been a key contact person to connect with and a go-to person if you have any queries and concerns. I found it really helpful. So I need to give a big shout out to Wilhelmina. She's been a real great support throughout. So ensuring I've had all the documentation and information that I need to understand the background of the project, the specific responsibilities and expectations throughout. And like receiving information, the agendas and the documentation ahead of time through our meetings was really helpful to make the best use of everyone's time and prepare. I think during meetings, it's important to be aware of different communication styles and personalities. And, you know, I think getting to know one another and offering to allow people to contribute their feedback in session, but also outside of that if they feel more comfortable. And also just being aware of different people's, I guess, confidence and comfortability with technology. So obviously with COVID, we've had to do all of our meetings online. So just that's an important consideration for people joining working groups with a lived experience. So I'd really just encourage organisations to recruit people with lived experience to their working groups to ensure projects and services are meeting the needs of all individuals that may wish to access their services. So thank you.
Thanks, Candice. And it's not only about the PHNs, you know, sourcing people with lived experience externally. I remember when Malene first started back in 2018, so there's 31 around the country, and there was only 2 PHNs. So there was Brisbane North and Coordinator down in New South Wales and the fabulous Tim Heffernan. Only 2 PHNs that actually employed an identified lived experience coordinator within the PHN. Since that time, we've now got 6 PHNs, I think, that actually have identified lived experience on staff, and then a number of others that are, like Candice is explaining, reaching out and bringing in, you know, people like Candice with lived experience expertise. So one of the things I'm really interested in is, because I'm old also, and is, you know, and I've really got nothing to lose. You know, back in the early days for me, there were a lot of shame attached to sharing, you know, your mental health AOD or, you know, other issues. But we've, you know, as I said earlier, you know, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. But for young people, I'd like to ask Maddie a question. So Maddie's our fabulous project officer, and Maddie, you know, you joined our team a bit over 12 months ago now, and so, you know, what should people consider when looking to apply for an identified lived experience position, and sort of what's the pros and cons from your perspective, you know, being in the younger generation, you know, in terms of putting yourself into identified roles?
Thanks, Paula. Yeah, I was previously employed at Brisbane North PHN, and prior to that, Nepean Blue Mountains PHN, but in like a mainstream role. Then I saw the job opportunity advertised for the lived experience identified Malene project officer role. I didn't really know what to expect, but I applied for it anyway. just because I kind of had already been working in the organisation for some time. So knew it was kind of a safe enough space to apply. Once I got into the role, I had to learn how to use my lived experience lens. And this was really a different perspective to approaching work than I was kind of used to previously. So I've been in the role for just over 12 months now. I found more or less that my lens is really about advocacy and using a recovery focus. It's an integral skill using lived experience lens, and it is complementary to just your regular kind of project officer and project management toolkit. Through this work, I've become really passionate about professionalising the peer work space. So working in this space, like Paula kind of alluded to before, you'll often hear an acknowledgement around we stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us. So that's about recognising the leaders in this space who have worked really, really hard to get lived experience work on the agenda and to get, you know, these paid positions in organisations. So we want this knowledge and insight to be accessible, and we want it to be passed down because we don't need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to lived experience approach to working and using that perspective and that lens. So working in a lived experience role, you might feel pressure to disclose. And if you are a young person, you might want to consider things like stigma and discrimination, as it is unfortunately still exists. But what I like to remind myself of is the reality that everybody has been touched by mental health, mental illness in some way, shape or form, whether they know someone, they care for someone, or they are someone with a lived experience. So I heard this from Ellie Hodges. She is the founder of Lelin, a peer-run and led organisation in South Australia, that it's not always going to be a safe space, but we need to work to create safe enough spaces for this work to be impactful. So I think if you're coming from a place of authenticity, recovery and healing, then you will make an impact. I completed a degree of social science in 2020, and one of the key takeaways and key things I learned is that telling your story in a safe way not only aids in the recovery of other people who listen to you speak, but it also has a positive influence on your own recovery journey. So essentially, my journey into this work has been a really positive experience for me. I certainly don't have it all figured out, but I'm learning every day, and Paula is kind of right beside me and is always kind of helping me stay on track with, you know, our focus and our priorities and things like that. So, yeah, thanks, Paula.
And stirring the bucket internally within our PHN. I kind of say if they're not a bit grumpy with me, I'm not doing my job. So thanks for that, Maddie. Now this kind of links a bit with Maddie. So we've had a question here, and I can barely see. I'm interested in the next developments of workforce development, a move from peer workers to other lived experience defined roles. You know, researchers, facilitators, clinicians, etc. What does it mean to bring lived experience to a current role? How is it used effectively? How do we progress this? Would anyone like to respond to that one? We're noting that we've only got a few minutes left. Kerry, can I chuck that one over to you?
Yeah, no problem. And you might have to remind me halfway through my answer, because there was a few elements to that. It was fabulous, and you know, like I guess a quick shout out to some of the emerging changes in the research space. For example, the Alive Academy is now just starting on that journey of understanding what needs to be researched and how it's researched, driven by people with lived experience. So there are kind of green shoots that are happening. I think that that will have a critical impact. The National Mental Health Commission is also designing some more, a suite of documents to support the guidelines, just to support particular areas and sectors in this rollout of what is, a disruptive innovation. And Paula, you talked about you're not doing your work unless it's a bit messy and a bit ugly and a bit challenging. And, Pat Deegan has often talked about the peer workforce as a disruptive innovation, and that people are working on the intersection of love and outrage, and that's not necessarily a very safe space. So I think we really do need to bring that trauma-informed perspective through a lot more strongly. I think, we need to resource HR departments in terms of recruitment and retention. So a lot of the issues sit actually in the organisations that are currently delivering services. In the guidelines particularly, there is a very, very large component of the technical work that needs to be done, the cultural work, the competency development work, to get people and organisations to understand the theories, the values, the competencies of lived experience. Because, let's face it, this is the future of the workforce, and the theories around citizenship recovery and personal recovery and what we call structural competency, conceptual competency, these are significant changes for the existing organisations to work through. I think the SQUEG, the Safety and Quality Engagement Guide that Darren was part of earlier in the year, was a useful document in terms of supporting organisations to safely engage with people. But there is an enormous amount of organisational, system, sector and clinical capacity building to do. Leadership cannot just sit with lived experience. We have to see leadership from the existing workforce.
Very true, Kerry. And
Paula, can I just say, I put a link in the chat for people that they can go to. If they look in the chat, there's a link there to the Commission site.
Okay. And I guess the other thing just to flag too that, full acknowledgements to Dr. Louise Burns and her team. They were the project managers for developing the National Lived Experience Workforce Guidelines, and we'll be working with Louise over these coming months to be running webinars and discussion opportunities for different cohorts, including CEOs of PHNs, including department, states and territorial, including mental health services and Louise is going to contextualise and tailor that to each group. Where was I going with that? So, I think this year's going to be, that's where I was going with that. So, and if we are still live, I'm not sure if we're even still going, but I'll say it anyway. Louise's research has shown that unless we get that commitment and culture at the executive level, we'll never get it right. So, over the years, we've seen more and more exposure, and that actually creates more and more awareness of the value and the lived experience lens. So, look, on behalf of all of our fabulous panel, I'd just like to thank those of you who joined us. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the day. Stay safe and stay well. If anyone would like to get in touch with us, our email is Malene at brisbanenorthphn.org.au. So thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.